All right. That's quite a score for contrast and great ideas, and also things that, gives me a lot to talk about in terms of helping you out trying to fix things and so on. So, first thing I want to say, Kevin, is I really appreciate all the comments that you've been leaving. You've been one of the most commentingest persons on under these videos, so that's just hugely appreciated. That is totally the spirit of the community that I'm trying to foster with these evaluations, to get people talking to each other and communicating. And I'll just put in a very quick part of my diatribe so that I don't have to add it at the end, and that is that I just really want people to do that across, like whether you are participating in this or not, if you're viewing this and you have a bit of advice for Kevin, or you just want to tell him how much you enjoyed his score, just leave a comment below. If you're on Patreon, leave it in the Patreon comments. If you are on Facebook or on YouTube, possibly kind of a wider audience on YouTube for some of these posts. Yeah, just tell us what's going on, because when I am turning out 165 evaluations over 8 weeks and there's no comments, I just feel like I'm talking into a vacuum. So at the very least, you'll cheer me up, all right, and make me want to continue to do these challenges. And at the most, you will foster a communication between you and other orchestrators, and you might even make a friend or have a colleague out there who might want to work with you on a project. All right, now before we dive into this, there is one thing I'm going to teach you here, Kevin, and it's just the simplest little fix. I'm looking at your score. I'm noticing all of these dynamic markings just in plain text, right? Okay, so let's say I wanted to put pianissimo under this note. All right, so you already know this, and that is Command E, right? And we get our blinking cursor here. Now I'm leaving my thumb sitting on the Command key. Right? So that's the whole trick. Don't lift it and type PP. All right? Just leave your thumb sitting on that note, or sitting on that computer key, and then type PP. Right? And then you get a beautifully engraved piece of dynamic text. All right? So that's the trick, right? And then all of these skimpy little undernourished dynamic markings could be looking nice and big and bold and well fed. All right? So please remember that trick. Once again, it's Command E to get our expression text in Sibelius, and leave your thumb on the Command key. Then type whatever it is you're going to type. All right? All right. Well, I won't mess around with your score, but that's just this is just the simplest tip. And I actually see like one of these right in here. So just remember, just leave your thumb on the command key and then do your typing. Okay. So now to jump into this, I'm going to apply some of the criteria that are going on here. And as everybody noticed, this is one of our earlier entries to these Patreon support levels that does not actually start from the beginning and go forwards. There are going to be a few here on the semi-brev level. There was a lot of, people wanted to have me evaluate this part or that part, and that's great. I really like breaking it up. It keeps it from being too much the same for me too, though it's never boring. So we're starting from D, and one of the concerns with D, and Kevin, you may have missed the announcement where I talked about pitfalls, right? Because there are some pitfalls in here that you have to address, and I think it would involve rescoring quite a bit of this work the way that you've got it now. Okay, so the first thing is I find it fascinating how you chose to score those low, very fast broken octaves not so low, right? You brought the level of them up quite a bit. So that's the first thing, and that, hats off to you. That's fine to make those kinds of changes and have it play across the whole orchestra, and maybe that's something that Falla would have chosen to do as well. Okay, but the problem is, the pitfall is the fact that it is going so fast at agitato that this kind of offbeat playing is really kind of impossible for your players in order to simulate the idea of the broken octave, right? So that was one of the pitfalls that I mean, it's just really hard to articulate at this speed. It's possible at slower speeds, but just rattling off a chain of, an unbroken chain of notes, it's just really not all that likely. So if you have not seen it yet, go back and watch my orchestrating Falla Part 1 video. Or is it? No, it's not Part 1. It's Part 2. Sorry, near the end of Part 2, where I talk about how I dealt with the whole broken octave thing. And you can actually in Part 1 you can actually see the entire score and see like just how I was wrestling with this whole section of this whole section of the work to try to make it really easily playable or comfortably playable like I had fast single tonguing in my bassoons, trading off with one another, each getting about 5 or 6 notes a piece before going on to the other player, things like that, so I wouldn't use up their lip. So that was one part of the pitfall, and if it weren't for that problem, then this would actually be scored in a very intriguing way. You're balancing here mezzo forte to forte in the English horn, between English horn and horn, and I think the players are really exposed like this, and they're listening to each other, and you've got this little support here from timpani. This might be something that the timpanist would elect to do a pedal change. Like they would have one of their pedals set to D, and then they'd have one set to C, and they would go D, D, and then change to E flat, and then back, and then play the C, and come back to D and do a roll on it. So that's probably how I would score it if I had to do, usually I would not even bother throwing in the E flat there. I would just have a row of Ds, because the ear is going to, especially at pianissimo and even at mezzo forte, the ear is going to supply the E flat, right? Because even though there's something beautifully round and specific about the timpani's sound, you can twist the ear into thinking that it's hearing something else, and you just save a little bit of hassle for the player. Although, this is not, at this speed, it's still not that much of a hassle to do the change. It's just you get a tiny bit of glissando coming in and going out of that note so quickly. Okay, so then then you're adding the oboe above so that you kind of get that more bouncy feeling, and then doubling up on your horns. And see, here you're saying four, so as if there were eight horns. It's probably not as likely to have eight horns in a score like this. But I mean, it's like, if you want to explore that, it's not something I'm going to deny people. I'm thinking ahead down the road. Several years from now, I do want to have an excerpt of a work by a composer that was originally scored for piano or chamber music. And that composer have been famous for immense, massive, towering scoring. Okay, and that is a situation where I would tell people, look, you can have six horns, you can have eight horns, you can. If the composer that I chose was Mahler or Strauss or Bruckner or somebody like that, then I would just say, look, go to town, right? Just because that would be it would be fun to look at some massive scores. Not that I could spend any much more time on it than I normally do, but it would be fun to see that bigger scale scoring. And then look, we have got the same problems of timing here, of like coming in on the offbeat and just really precisely hitting the opposite, the other 16th, the alternating 16th every single time. It's really, really tricky at very fast speeds. And I would say tricky to the point where it will start to come apart no matter, how well you intend it. And it also limits the flexibility of what the conductor can do, because they know that they're working with players who are dealing with this, this real huge ask. And then, right in here, più meno a poco rubato, 132. It's still just way too fast to do broken octaves like this. It's just, that was the other pitfall. That was, like are broken octaves possible? Now, to be charitable about it, it's not very many in a row, right? But it still is probably a little bit beyond most bassoonists who aren't like at a solo level to, just to rattle off these broken octaves so quickly and so precisely in the way that the music really needs it here. And now I think that what's really cool about this, though, is that, like, here we got a situation where you have really pulled back in a place where most people would be adding a ton of pressure and starting to get big early, which is something I did. I feel the music, that's the obvious thing to do with the music. But you have really, really scaled back to the point where the harp is perfectly audible. There's absolutely no problem. And that, like, the big concern here is that there's a kind of hallucinatory feeling to this section here, the più meno, which, by the way, that is my addition to the score, but it's just the way that everybody plays it as a pianist. So, yeah, it's it's unsettled harmonically. There's a lot of rubato. There's a lot of pulling back and forth, and it's just almost as if, this person who has been at this big party in Andalusia is, the tequila or whatever he's been drinking, it's just been getting to him. Their head is starting to spin. And, and they are just becoming aware that everybody is partying and going nuts around them, and this massive riot of color and singing and sound and everything else, right? That's the way I sort of envision this programmatically. So how to express that? And I think that, like, the way that you really underplay this, you just really give your players almost no time to take their mutes off. They would have to have those little rubber bands and that just like flick it off in a second. So it's not the kindest. It's not the kindest scoring for mutes, but But the muted strings, I like it. And the little touches of pizzicato, and like your little clarinet solo in there trading off to the flute. And then I think A2 in here is like a very, very hard sound compared to the pizzicato. Like that, the only thing I would say here is this is not too balanced right in there. Anyways, but isn't it great how much you gave me to talk about just one page? It's really, really fun. Now on to the next page. And that takes us to here. You have these big kind of thrusts, pow. And okay, so like with expansion, like so what does that mean when you have piano marked, right? So like you have piano and you have no crescendo marking, right? So he wants it to be expansive, right? I would say just get rid of the text there and just make the context of the music say just you can be expansive as you want to, right? Because you are the orchestrator, you are defining what is possible there and so on. Here you're asking your string players to play octaves in with a non-divisi, and that's so long as the conductor doesn't decide to push them too much, then that's totally possible. I'm just it's not the smoothest sound, right? It's a very disconnected sound with the finger position jumping back and forth, but it's still still totally doable. Okay, however, one thing that I would say in here that just kind of isn't a balance of elements in this section. I think that you need to do some more work on this, and I'm actually really glad that you asked me to look at this, because I feel that you might have had like a really great beginning section, which I don't recall. I did look at your entire score, but I don't have that fresh in my mind right now. But you might have had like a really big, splashy first section. You feel great about it, but you're not quite as confident about the D section. So in this kind of situation, like where you are a semi-brev supporter, you could ask me to look at anything, or maybe you're just a supporter on Patreon, and you have something that you need that needs attention, right? Better to ask me to look at the section that you feel the least certain about rather than the most certain about. So, ba 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 bum. Here we got our bass clarinet and contrabassoon working together. So the thing about it is that these instruments are scored 2 octaves apart. And you're going to hear, like, if you can hear this at all against the, this kind of out of balance, like you've got your heavy brass piano and your horns fortissimo. We'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, but you're setting up a situation where at 2 octaves apart, you can hear the overtone in the middle, right? You can hear the really strong second overtone of the contrabassoon, and then the the top of the body of tone of the instrument is going to start to play around with the fundamental of the instrument above it. So this is sounding G2, so G at the bottom of a normal bass staff, and this is sounding G4, right? So G above middle C. So it is really widely spaced, right? And then you maintain that distance, right? And so like, I mean, if you want that kind of odd, strange feeling in there, then you are going to get it. But I would say that probably the safest thing to do here would be to add a player in the middle. I mean, it's really lovely to pair up bass clarinet and contrabassoon, though. The real strongest effect you get is when the bass clarinet is at an octave higher than the contrabassoon rather than 2 octaves higher. The 2 octaves higher, you're kind of getting more into atmospheric Stravinsky kind of stuff rather than like a functioning bass part in a big splashy tutti like this. Okay, so we've got this crunch, 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 do 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 do, and I think that all works pretty well. But like, still, you've got your you've got your heavy brass at a disadvantage, so they're softly accompanying the fortissimo strings, so that they're just not going to be audible, right? I hate to say that. Yeah, you say, oh, the trombone is not going to be audible, barely audible, right? And then this English horn part right in here is also just a bit of a disadvantage. So that, look, the main thing I would say in this, I'll just make a general comment, or I'll just be kind of stuck on this part all day, and that is that it's just kind of underscored, right? What do the strings need in here? They need some support from the winds, right? What do the brass need in here, and this this English horn and this other kind of stuff? It needs kind of fuller scoring, right? It needs to have some dynamic balance in there. What does the brass need right in here? They need to be more balanced, and I think it's perfectly fine to have it like kind of have a massive brass, kind of massive brass scoring trading off with sincere octaves in the strings, but those strings need to be supported. The brass needs to be louder and balanced throughout, and you could be bringing in your lower heavy brass in a big way to just really help things out, whether it's to double what's going on in here, or what, to support from sort of the upper lower middle right in here, just to make this firmer. Like you got two trombones and we've got one trombone line, right? So there's so much more that could be happening in here to make this sound fuller. And I would just say, and also this is also very underscored, just having a little double bass and a cello there and so on. If anything, you should be trying to double both parts, right? Having your contrapart being doubled throughout by your double basses at pitch, and your bass clarinet part being doubled by cellos. But maybe bring the bass clarinets down, or the bass clarinet down an octave, okay? And then just whatever this is very well intentioned, but it needs to be. You're basically doubling the trumpet right in here, and the thing is that you'll disappear. Like the English horn is just not going to come out. It's not going to come through. It's not going to adequately thicken the trumpet. Like if you bring up, like this is forte and that's piano, so you get a little bit of a balance now, but against like these octave strings, if you thicken them up to the right points, it's like if you fix things the right way, this will stop working, and it is barely working now, right? So maybe you don't need the English horn to double the trumpet right in there. You just need the trumpets to be loud, or you need everybody to be loud, and you need to divide the functions a little bit more directly in this kind of scoring. Okay, so that's all I'm going to say about it, but just really, really intriguing. It gave me a lot to talk about, and I always like scores like that. Okay, so now you're going ba-dum-bum-bum-bum-bum. And here you're going second violins, holding on to it. And okay, at this point, they're going to be molto forte. At this point, they're going to be forte. At this point, they're going to be mezzo forte. And then they're going to be mezzo piano, and then pianissimo, right? So here you're starting this. And if these for second violins are really doing their job at triple F, which triple F is, to my mind, triple F is as loud as you can play and still be musical. Quadruple F is as loud as you can play and not worrying about whether or not it's musical. And then quintuple F is basically just, strat abuse. There was an album by Frank Zappa where Steve Vai was listed. He wasn't listed under guitar. He was listed under strat abuse, right? So it's basically just making your instrument scream for just as loud as it possibly can. And musical or unmusical, it's just, we're past all of that, and it's just getting ridiculous. So you are going to be incredibly loud right here. If you did this right here, forte piano, right? Then I think that this would have a chance of coming through. But then we're running into another pitfall, and once again, the broken intervals, the just rattling off these sequential broken sixths, coming in on the 16th extremely precisely with these accents. It's just not quite realistic, right? I'm not saying that it's impossible, because there are people out there who can play almost anything and they have an incredible sense of precision, but they are not populating the, every section of every professional orchestra out there. Okay, to a certain degree, you as the orchestrator have got to make things reasonable for the players. Like, especially as a developing composer, or somebody who is not world famous yet. And look, I am among that. Like, I have some street cred, with the composer community and with the orchestrator community, and I've got my list of clients, and they respect me and they recommend me to other people, and that is fantastic. And I feel like I am earning a healthy living here. But even I feel that I do not have the authority to score something that is this difficult, to ask the players on my behalf to study something, like, especially with this huge leap right in here, C to E. Even slower. It's just some big leaps and jumping around and fairly really fast scoring. Even I feel that I do not have the authority to ask them to do that. Now, maybe if I were, somebody with a huge name like John Adams or somebody like that, I could actually ask the players, look, this is part of this big memorial piece, or this big new concerto that I'm working on. I really, really need the strings to woodshed a section and so on. But even at that, it's really, really, it's just like, this is like concerto level. It's like violin concerto level stuff, and you're actually scoring it triple P, as if you don't want anybody to hear it, right? So, so once again, take a look at the way I solved some of the problems going into section E, right? Like having some players doing like double tonguing, having some players trading off, like, having one group of strings going da-da, and then the other group going da-da, so it's da-da-da-da, 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 right? And then having the clarinets doing trading off looping. There, one clarinet would go da-da-leedle, and then the other one would come in da-da-leedle, and then they would like just trade off and step on each other's toes and sound nice and seamless. All right, so so watch out for those pitfalls, right? So I think from now on in my announcements, I'm going to point out the things that I would worry about having to restate over and over again, and there's things that, the problems that are absolutely going to present themselves. So really watch for those in the future, I would say. But that does not mean that this does not work if people could do it, right? And it's very enchanting. A little underscored for the intensity of the music. I like the kind of the flaring right in here, pushing the flutes and the piccolos up to fortissimo over the strings. It basically is going to, on the alternating beats, right? Saying that this is much slower and more playable. You just really kind of are blasting out the strings right in there. And then in here, if you're going to push your clarinets like this, shouldn't the strings also get a crescendo? And, just like overbalancing, right? Pianissimo to forte, triple P to nothing, right? So the people are just going to hear the clarinet hooting around in here, and sort of the violins murmuring in the background, right? So I don't think that you want that. I think you need to work on balancing some of these sections a little bit more, okay? All right, so now let's check out the beautiful pastoral section, of which you did a lot of really amazing, cool things, and I'm going to comment on those. So I don't want you, don't feel beaten up right in here about this. I'm seeing the potential of what you've got and how you could really improve it and turn this into something great, right? It's not that I'm trashing it. All right, so now on to section E, and let's talk about the a couple of concerns. Now, these are things that I've got in my list of evaluation criteria, and I think it's interesting that you didn't use harp. right? That's just kind of like a more obvious choice, which I ended up doing. But, it doesn't mean that anybody else has to. And you had the same scoring, which was another potential pitfall I think I might have pointed out. Like there is the rotating pattern, scoring the rotating patterns exactly as they are written for a keyboard instrument, which is, has that sort of pianistic attack. Will that work for strings? And it sort of does, but you kind of get this ya da 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 sort of feeling from the upper voice, right? And then ba-dum from the other voice. And the problem is not the incidence of the pitches of the attacks. It is the sustain, right? It sort of creates this kind of it creates a bit of inertia, right? And kind of familiarity. It's like every pitch is not equal, right? When you have a rotating pattern, every pitch is equal, and you've got the pedal down. And in the pianistic sense, when it's scored out exactly the way that it is, right? And of course, the other problem here is that there is no, like, you've got everything being played as separately bowed notes, right? Rather than, maybe you would want to bow by groups, like every time the pitch seriously changes, bow that group of notes. So there are some things left out in here that you would want to address. And also, it's a long time to be going on with the same instruments, right? So you just have to think about that. And you also have this kind of strange imbalance, right, with mezzo piano in the cellos and forte in the violas, right? So you've got your violas going da 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 da, and you got your cellos going da 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 da, right? So it just doesn't really feel balanced. So those are things to watch out for. All right, now, what do I really love about this page? Okay, well, I will preface it by saying that the criterion for this part of the work is authenticity of style and choice of melodic voice. So that's not necessarily a concern for you here. It's something that I kind of judge myself on, trying to be true to Falla. But in this case, you are just having some fun with it, and you're being true to your own voice. And I think that that's important. I really love all of the contrapuntal touches in here, and I think that they just are really fantastic, and a really great, innovative idea that I have not yet had a chance to look at in the evaluations for this part of the music. Okay, so we get into some problems, though. I'm going to just quickly I took down some notes because I just did not want to forget when I was getting towards the end. And okay, so one of the problems with this page is that you've got this hugely powerful phrase, and it's dovetailing to the trumpet right in here. So mutes on, do you mean that this is more than one trumpet? It's not clearly marked, like which trombone, which trumpet, who is playing what in a lot of these, at the beginnings of a lot of these phrases. I left one or two out myself in my own score for this challenge, so I'm not going to beat at anybody too much for it. But yeah, try to tell me how many people are playing at once. Maybe I'll have a checklist. I think I'm going to do that next time. I'll have a checklist of things to, like, things to do, like format the score horizontally, make sure that you're not sending me a score with panorama in it, delete the piano staves in the final version, that kind of thing. And make sure that you have marked the entrances. Okay, so yeah, I mean, things get a little clustery, but then here you really turn on the power, but then you're trading off to just a single instrument. And as powerful as trumpet is, it just doesn't feel like it connects. It feels like just a massive drop off with the trumpet And it's also that the trumpet is going diminuendo there, right? So you just really kind of feel like there's just a sudden loss of energy that isn't necessarily picturesque, right? It's just more of like kind of losing strength. And the other problem too is that you've got these very piquant little phrases coming in marked forte, right? While people are just minding their own business trying to finish up this little phrase right in here, and you already have this big energy right in here, and then here's the main idea right in here, which is kind of hard to hear, and this other commentary continuing on, right? So it really seems to be kind of blasting out the main idea. So I would say just watch out how you're scoring the main idea right in here, that make sure that it has thematic continuity, right? And that it doesn't get overwhelmed by all of the filigree and adding added parts from other instruments. Now, on our very last page, we're bringing everything to the end, and I had a bunch of little comments. This is just a little too soft right in here. Pianissimo, morendo, it's just a bit much, right? And then also you are holding this F sharp, and there is an F double sharp in the viola, so that's going to clash, right? And this is another problem that I ran into. You'll notice in my score that I just had the oboe d'amore part that was playing the same exact little line. I had it end in enough time for the F double sharp to be played in the other instruments, I think harp and so on, written as a G natural, because harps can't do double accidentals. Okay, so this was another thing that I felt a little unsure about, or I just felt like it was just not very effective. Like here you've got, this may be left over. I think this is left over from my score, right? So like the idea that there is a caesura here, right? So how can we have a caesura and a tie leading into the next part? That's one concern. And the other concern too is that like this is robbing the strings from just this beautiful stuff. Like you're saying pianissimo distantly and so on, and you're basically just dropping the piano part onto the violin staves, and that it would really need to be severely divisi and so on. And there's possibly some better choices that you could make in how these are being divided, rather than just having the violins divide things exactly the way the voices were in the piano part. But we'll talk about that in a minute. The main thing is that, like, how can we get this sense of distance and this sudden sense of stillness when these violas want to keep playing, right? How about if everybody just stopped and shut the hell up, and then we have this beautiful distant touch. Biam, 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 bum, 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 right? What if too, like, how many string players do you have here available? What if everybody just shut the hell up here and then played along, added their voices to this, so that you didn't have to divide everything so much? You could have this lower G sharp right in here, played by your cellos, and then you could have this C sharp here played by the violas. Very easy for them to reach and to throw in the occasional double stop, right? And then you can divide this up and just have the top line played by the first violins, and these bottom intervals played by the second violins, now that they're freed up from having to do this, right? And then you're spread out more evenly across the violin section or the string section, and it's just more easy for everybody to play. Kind of nice to add this little touch in here. That's really cool. And then I really love the bassoon coming here. And the harmonization around it doesn't distract from where it is. I like the English horn right in there. And then we're coming back in here. Here the harp, is functional, and it even works with the timpani. But why is it triple P? Right? I'm looking at the score, right? And it's it's diminuendo to misterioso and then pianissimo going on in the piano part, right? But so why is the harp so? I mean, that the harp is already the softest instrument in the orchestra. Why are we, having them play softer than everybody else around them, right? You've got these staccato violas. Your harp should be at least the same dynamic level as the violas, right? Or else all you hear there is just viola with maybe just some murmuring in the background that could be something. Could be harp, could be, I don't know what it is, right? So you want to make sure that the harp is clear if if it is a functional element, and it can be. Everything else is so soft, right? It's a great place to throw in some harp, and then keep the timpani, at pianissimo. I would say triple P is a little, it's a bit too soft, and then you've got your, I like the way that you spread it around. That's very, very cool. Okay, and I just really have no complaints about anything else, except for this one thing. Here you're going ba bum, and you've got all this weight on it, right? And these are two separated notes. You're basically transcribing what's going on in the piano score. Is that really what you want? Do you really want that bam bam, right? Or do you want like a slur dum? Or do you want maybe just to take the accents away and go da da? The problem is that nobody can hear this E, and this E is so fundamental to the whole harmony right in here, right? And you've got louder scoring on and accented scoring on your clarinet, doubled by the first violins, and you've even thrown in a third element to the octave that wasn't in the original score, right? And this poor little E right in here, E octave in your second violins, has no doubling from anybody, right? So balance these things, right? You got an English horn player and a bassoon player available to play these E's, and they could be supplying that, and they could also be tying those E's going forwards. Like there's here's the other problem. Da-dum, ping, right? Shouldn't this be more like da-da? And the ping can happen around it, right? Like it would in the piano part. So I would say this should be rescored in a way that you can continue on, like the B can hold, right? The E can hold, and then the other elements are added around it, right? So for instance, right here, like there's no need to restate this written C right in here in your first clarinet. Just tie it, right? And then just, what's the second player doing? Nothing. Tie that as well and keep going. And then here, that same note with the B, maybe this needs to be reorganized. Maybe you don't need this low C sharp down here. Maybe your violas need to be playing E. Maybe your cellos can be providing the top E there, and your violas are free, and now they can just play this E, and they can hold it all the way through to there. Now your seconds can play this, and the second player, the second violinist is already playing this B. You can go bum bum, and then just tie the B along with the clarinets, and then your first violins don't need to do anything here, and they can just go E at the end, right? And then you've solved your problem. So that's one way that you could do this. I like the little roll in here, and tuba, contrabassoon, and so forth. That's fine. You can really get down to almost nothing, right? I would say I think that quadruple P is a little much. Like I was just defining my approach to dynamics earlier as, triple F being as loud as you can play musically, and quadruple F as being as loud as you can play and not worrying about the music, right? as loud as you can play non-musically. And then, of course, quintuple F is just not even really playing as much as it is sort of, using your instrument as like a war horn. Okay, so just sort of as a sound effect. So it's the same thing in the opposite direction with pianissimo. So triple P is like as soft as you can play musically, right? And then quadruple P is as soft as you can play, and like, at that point it's basically just like all you can hear is the sound of the bow on the string, not really producing a much of a pitch at all, right? It's sort of like, running, if you've ever played around with a violin bow and just like bowed something that wasn't a violin, you sort of hear the scrape of the rosin as it interacts with whatever it's going across, right? That's quadruple P to me. So it's getting just a little too soft. I think you telescope down a little too quickly to something that's incredibly, just way down there. And there's something similar to that about like breath as well, right? The pianissimo being a really good, softest kind of dynamic for most uses, and then triple P is just really kind of taking things down as soft as you can play musically. Then when you get to quadruple P, it's almost just like air effects. It's almost just like breath, or just like niente, if your instrument can play niente, like clarinet, or subtones on a saxophone, or also niente on lower flute. Just that same kind of whisper, right? That isn't necessarily the most musical thing. It's almost like background noise. Sound development on a score. Excuse me, on a film soundtrack. You get the it's just part of like the ambient sound of the music. Okay, so that is all I had to say about this. Thanks again for this score. It is just so much fun, Kevin. And, thank you again for all of your great comments that you've added so far. And hey, everybody else who's stuck it out this far with my ramblings, be like Kevin, okay? Score your damnedest, explore things, have fun with it, throw in everything you can, just throw it at the wall from time to time, just see what works. And then bring me your evaluation next year and ask me to look at the parts that you feel that need the most advice, and you just have the most fun with it. That is absolutely like living your best life with this orchestration challenge. Okay, so just I appreciate it all. I appreciate that sense of daring, the creativity, the and of course, not to mention supporting on Patreon and being supportive in the community of other voices, other people who are trying to do their thing, because that's how collaborations and friendships and our own personal abilities, as social animals, are all developed. So, thank you, everybody. Thanks to all of my supporters. Thanks everybody out there on the internet watching this. Thanks to all the website subscribers. And with that, I will take a little break now for breakfast. It looks like the window people have not shown up yet to bang around upstairs. So I managed to get quite a few evaluations finished this morning before that happened, and I'll come back and do a few more today. But you will see these being released at about 3 a day as I get through the very many semi-brev entries for the 2021 Orchestration Challenge. See you all soon.